الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. أما بعد فإن أصدق الكلام كلام الله وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وإن شر الأمور محدثاتها وإن كل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. One of our scholars in our days at this era, a man came to him and he said, for the last 35 years I've never prayed. For the last 35 years, I've never performed siyam. For the last 35 years, I never thought of Allah Almighty. I had a sister who lives in Canada. For 10 consecutive years, she's been telling me, come and visit me, but I kept on neglecting her invitation. After 10 years of trying to get me to visit her, I went to her and visited her. She took me to Niagara Falls. And on our way to Niagara Falls, as I saw the scene, she had put a lecture about the names and the attributes of Allah Almighty. And it was a lecture about Al-Muhaymin, one of the names of Allah Almighty, which is in English, the dominant. With the sight he saw and what he heard in the car as a lecture, it totally transformed him into another person. He said, and he spoke to the scholar, he said, I heard that tape several times. It's the first time I hear something about Allah Almighty. Not only that, I told my sister, give me all of the cassettes or the tapes that you have about the names and the attributes of Allah Almighty. I took all of them. I listened to all of them. It's really an amazing experience. He said, I felt connected to Allah Almighty. I felt that there is a connection, that the line is hot between me and Allah Almighty. It was the best moments of my lifetime. You know, he said to the scholar, you know what is, my total life has changed. The best moment of my life is when the day finishes after Salat al-Isha. And I go to my home and I start praying the nightly prayer. It is a joy that I've never experienced in my whole life. My life has changed immediately. It has changed from hell to heaven. It has changed from misery to happiness. It has changed from lost to being found, I found myself recently. My dear brothers and sisters, an experience similar to the believer. When you are on an airplane, and when the airplane is ready to move to depart, it moves in a very slow motion on the runway. It moves and it stops and moves and stops and moves and stops until it stops, waiting for the signal from the tower in the airport to give it the okay to take off and fly. The minute the plane receives the signal from the control tower, you can see the engines of the airplane, the high noise, the full speed, the power that the pilot puts in that engine, and the shaking that takes place for the moment of liftoff. Likewise, the believer. The believer is that airplane. The believer listens, the Muslim listens, he reads, he ponders, he thinks, he discusses, he prays in this masjid, then goes to another masjid, he sees and observes, he talks to people until all the facts become obvious in his mind, and he starts seeing things clearly in his eyes, and then he can see the big reward that Allah has promised that is eternal in heaven, and the big penalty that Allah also has promised for losers in hellfire. At that point, it is the time for him to lift and take off in the path of Allah Almighty. Allah says in the Quran in Surah Al-Hadid, verse 16, أَلَمْ يَأْنِ لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أَن تَخْشَعَ قُلُوبُهُمْ لِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ وَمَا نَزَلَ مِنَ الْحَقِّ, which means in English, has the time not come for those who have believed that their hearts should become humbly submissive at the remembrance of Allah and what has come down of the truth. The most critical disease that can affect you is negligence. Negligence, you neglect the fact Allah has commanded you. Negligence about Allah Almighty. Negligence about the hereafter. Negligence that you should obey Allah. Not negligence about what is halal, what is haram. Negligence about what is there for you in the hereafter, whether heaven or hellfire. This is the most dangerous, critical disease that can affect a Muslim. Neglecting the fact that he has a duty, that there's a role that he should do, that there's a creator that created him. Allah Almighty says in the Quran, in Surah Al-Imran, verse 190, إِنَّ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَاخْتِلَافِ اللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ لآيات لأولي الألباب الذين يذكرون الله قياما وقعودا وعلى جنوبهم ويتفكرون في خلق السماوات والأرض ربنا ما خلقت هذا باطلا سبحانك فقنا عذاب النار. The meaning, indeed, in the creation of the heavens and earth and the alternation of night and the day are signs for those who understand. Signs for those who understand, not to those who neglect the understand. Who remember Allah while standing or sitting or lying on their sides and give thought to the creation of heavens and earth, saying, O Lord, you did not create this aimlessly, then protect us from the punishment of the fire. The companions of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, O Prophet of Allah, you know, I could almost visualize people in hellfire being punished, and I could almost visualize and see people in heaven enjoying that. That is the right vision that an honest Muslim should see when he reads the Quran and when he follows the commands of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. An embarrassing question. On the day of judgment, you will stand in front of Allah Almighty, and Allah Almighty will ask you, what have you done for my sake? أقول ما تسمعون واستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان يوم الدين. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as narrated by Anas ibn Malik radiallahu anhu, he said, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, I have experienced fear that no one has experienced for the sake of Allah. And I have experienced, I got hurt. I got hurt that no one has experienced getting hurt as I did for the sake of Allah. For 30 days and nights, neither me or Bilal had something to eat. Or neither me or Bilal had something that is edible by a human being, except what Bilal was able to hide under his armpits. Have you ever thought of that? The amount of sacrifice of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in presenting Islam to your doorstep, what took him, how much he suffered for that. Have you ever thought one day, going to your house, asking your wife, is there any food for us to eat? Then she would say no. Then you would ask her, not even a piece of bread. Then she would say no. Not even tea, she would say no. Not even a piece of cheese, no. Listen, Aisha, the wife of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ says, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ came one day and he said, do we have anything? She said, no. He said, then I am fasting. When it is time for you to move, when will the Muslim change from being a static Muslim into a dynamic Muslim? We want Muslims to be active. The knowledge that you gain throughout these years, what you've read, what you've learned, what you heard in khutbahs before this khutbah, and lectures and seminars that you've read, where is that information taking you? It should move you as the plane moved in the airport, to the point where the control tower gave it the signal to lift and fly. We want a Muslim with his knowledge that turns into action. We want a Muslim who contributes to the society that he is in. Our scholars had said, when faith settles in the heart of a Muslim, it immediately translates into action. There is no such thing as a static Muslim. A Muslim is a dynamic person. He is always proactive, trying to help, trying to seek, trying to change, trying to propagate, trying to teach, to give something to the community and change the world that is around him. In various places in the Quran, Allah Almighty said, فَفِرُّوا إِلَى اللَّهِ, escape to Allah. In another verse, فَاسْتَبِقُوا الْخَيْرَاتِ, race towards good deeds, action, action. In another verse, سَارِعُوا إِلَى مَغْفِرَةٍ مِنْ رَبِّكُمْ, hasten for the forgiveness of Allah. All of them require action, action, action. They all are in the Quran. Allah is telling you. Listen before I finish this khutbah. You will be buried one day, and you will be in the ground for Allah only knows how many hundreds and thousands and millions of years. During that period, you cannot do anything. You cannot change anything. It's over. Take advantage of every day that is left from your life. There are people around you. They are so simple, you see them, maybe without any money or wealth or knowledge or basic lifestyle they live, yet their ownership in heaven is tremendous because how they remember Allah, how they contribute towards Islam and Muslims. It's about time to start your engines running and to change from being a spectator who watches the world changes around him to someone who is proactive and help for the sake of Islam. I ask Allah Almighty what I have said for us, not against us. And I ask Allah Almighty that what I have said is to make us aware of the duty of a Muslim in every society, everywhere in the world he is. And I ask Allah Almighty to bless us and our children and our families and Muslims to be unified worldwide. Allahumma اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات المسلمين والمسلمات